first thing to do really is just talk about the nodes and the basis behind the nodes I've developed for SciTech, as well as how Node-RED works. Well, I think you're already familiar with it. You've been dragging and dropping nodes and doing stuff. So, I mean, effectively, we have nodes which represent elements of the SciTech system. So we've got zones, and we've got outputs, we've got flags, we've got counters, we've got sensors, the alarm mode, the alarm status, and responses. Yeah. And, you know, as you say, kind of drag and drop them where you want to put them. Okay, so I think Kevin just sent a note saying he's going to watch a recording later. But we can, so I can drag and drop a node onto the canvas, and this is this is a zone node. So if I double click on it, I can dig into it. And if you've loaded the configuration file, you can drop down this list and get all the zones in your system.
Yeah.
So you can kind of grab a zone, and then you can look at the values. At the moment, this is so the events it can generate are based upon the type of node it is. So for a zone, it can generate its value. So is it active or inactive? Its bypass state if that changes, but also the analog value if you've got using a zone as an analog input. Most of the time it's just value, so you can set a value. So now we're looking at Lounge PIR1, and we're interested in the status of that on or off, true or false. And this tick box here will mean that if that status changes, an event will be generated out of this node into whatever is downstream of it.
Right,
if we untick that, it will not generate events.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's quite straightforward. Yeah.
So that's the kind of trigger for generating an event off the change there.
So that will go down basically that node. Once you have that trigger on, the next node you put in will trigger the next node.
That's right, and it will send data to it. It will send data in the payload. So the basis of Node-RED and this kind of flow-based programming is you have we string together nodes like that.
Yeah.
And the data flows left to right. So the right-hand blob on a node is the output, and when the node can do an input, it's on the left-hand side.
Right.
So it always flows from the output
left
to the input.
Right,
yeah, left to right.
You can so just out of curiosity, you can take the so if you go to the SciTech node, you can take that back to the timestamp, I presume.
Yes, you could. Well, the timestamp one is a weird one because that node only generates outputs. But if you had a node which takes an input, then you can do that. So in fact, I want to do that now just to demonstrate something to you. So right. So let's go back to this node. So
which one are we in? We're in the
it's a zone. It's a zone.
Oh, you're in the zone mode. Okay, yeah.
So in fact, but I'm going to change that to an output node. For the sake of argument, let's put an output node in there because actually we can do something with it. So we're going to string the time stamp to the node. There we go. And we're going to string the output to this green box, which is a debug node. So the debug node will basically just print on here the data it gets, and it's really useful when you start building stuff up to understand, you know, what the message looks like, what the payload looks like. Now there's a flow is initiated by an event, and it creates the message object. And within that message object, there can be data. There can be something as simple as a true or false, so on or off, true or false, 1 or 0, you know, kind of Boolean logic. Or you can have very complex things inside there. You can have, you know, you can have images, or you can have text, or all manner of different things. And what you put in there is up to you, totally.
Yeah.
So the timestamp node, this little inject node, which is currently a timestamp, all it's going to do is inject a bit of data. I'm going to change it so it injects true into the payload. Okay. And then this output here, I'm going to select an output. I'm going to select a floodlight.
Yeah.
And is going to trigger when it changes, that value changes. And I'm going to allow the incoming event to set the output state. I'm going to choose simplifiers, which is Boolean. So when data comes in, it's going to look for the message.payload, which is what the inject node uses, and look for the value of it. And if it is true, it will turn it on, and if it's false, it will turn it off. Equally, if it was set to text that said on, it would turn it on. If it was set to text that was off, it would turn it off. It has a number of, it supports all these different types of values. So it could be numeric, 1 or 0, Boolean, on or off, yes or no, open or closed. And I kind of built those little different texts in there because some nodes for like the dashboard or for HomeKit and things like that use different kind of conventions. So I made it a bit flexible so that we could support those things with little work. Right. So that output there, the flood left, will allow the incoming event to set its state, and we will also report its state as a Boolean value in message.payload. Click OK there. I'm also going to create another node. So on my computer, can copy and paste another inject node, but I'm going to set this one to false. I'm going to string that to flood left as well. And if I deploy, so this is another tip here. In the deploy, there's a little arrow next to it.
Yeah.
And there's 3 types. Now, my preference is I think when you first kind of deploy node red, it always goes to this kind of standard deploy node, which is deploy everything. So every time you make a change and you press that button, every single node and every single flow is redeployed. Which means
everything's on the screen sort of thing gets done.
Everything in the entire system. So you could have multiple flows. So everything that's there, it all gets redeployed, which means that if you have nodes which kind of query on startup the status of the alarms like that, it all happens every single time you press deploy. So my tip is change the standard deployment method to only change modified nodes.
Yeah. In
that way, it's not disruptive. It's very simple, and as you make changes repeatedly, you're not going to be constantly querying all the parts of the alarm. You're just changing the stuff that you're interested in. It makes for a simpler and easier life, and is less disruptive. And in particular with my system, when I do a full query, then it generates events which causes other things to take place. Yeah. When I do a full deployment, it generates events which other things take place, and so things like my Alexa starts speaking and my TV does stuff and things like that, which isn't necessarily desirable.
Yeah, I think I get exactly what you mean there.
Okay, so I'm going to just deploy that. Okay, and then kind of demonstrate what that does. So I've got this debug node, this debug setup here as well. I've got it filtered again. So in the debug tab, you can filter it according to what kind of debug messages you want. If you select all nodes, you'll start seeing data from everything that's running on the system.
Right.
I reduce it to the current flow so that I'm only looking at data that's relevant to what I'm trying to test.
Yeah.
Okay. So now I've got this flood left. I've got a couple of buttons, true and a false. It's going to feed flood left, and it's going to report the output into here. So if I click true, you can see now that the flood left has turned on. It's gone to true. Yeah. So we saw, and we actually saw, and if I click false, you see that stuff happened there, didn't it? You see a little note saying it, and it is now turned off.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had these buttons have turned that output on and off. Let's just go back into here a minute, and we see that there's actually this other entry here. What's happening is we're getting 2 entries. We're getting this false and then true, and then we're getting a true and then a false. I'm just going to clear that down again and just press true again. We've got a false and then we've got a true. And the reason for that is there's another setting in here, which is the append. Now, the append will effectively report on the state of a node. So if I turn set output, allow incoming event to set output state, and leave everything else the same, just clear that, and then just deploy that, and then press a button. It won't change the state, but it will just tell us what the status is.
Yeah, yeah. I see exactly what you mean there.
If that makes sense. So
it does make perfect sense to me.
Good. So the append is going to report on the state. I can also turn off that trigger on new event. In fact, I've got some. I might have a better example of that somewhere. Let's go over here. No. No, not that one, not that one. Sorry, I did have. There we go. Okay, this is another node deployment. What we've got here is we've got two zones. They're actually the same zone, zone 4 on the system. They are neither of them allow incoming events to set the zone, so they don't set state, but we're going to demonstrate the difference between an active poll and a passive poll. So a passive poll will go back into this append. There's a append off, which means we're not going to report out what the current status is. We're simply going to perhaps change the status of it. A passive poll means when it receives an incoming event, it will send a message out with the status or the current known state of that device. Yeah. And an active poll actually goes back to the alarm and sends a command which queries the status of an object, like a zone or an output, whatever, and then sends it out as a new message. But they're slightly different. So first of all, just turn trigger on new event off. If I run a passive poll in this zone, you can see that what I'm doing is I'm also injecting some of the data into the message. So the message object, I'm sending a little value, a key value pair. Hello is the key and the value is Bob. I don't know why. We're sending that in the data. And if we look in the, and this is a detailed debug, we look in there, we can see hello Bob.
Hello Bob.
is in there. Okay, is the payload of the object. And we can see that the passive poll has now added the status of zone 4 to that message object. You can now see that that zone, it's a type of zone, and if you dig into the zone object, you can see what the zone name is and everything else about it, and the value is 0, it's false, it's not active at the moment. But we can see that we've appended that status of that zone to that message object, which had hello Bob. When we do that actively, what it actually does is it sends the query message to the zone, and that message is then destroyed, and then it waits until the alarm responds and then sends a new message. So if I did active poll there, so this is active poll now. What we've got is you've got, let's go down here. Hello Bob has gone in, so there's the hello Bob message, but we've now got a new payload which is of event rather than status, because an event has been generated, and that event is the alarm responding with the status of that zone, and we can see the zone is valued 0. But we don't have the original message, it's been lost because it was an active poll, and effectively what happened is we sent the command to the alarm, and then we don't wait, but when the alarm generates its response, that triggers a new event, and that zone sends it out. So just a difference between active and passive. It's important because you might find yourself, generating a message, and you think, I just want to check on the status of a zone before I take an action. And you check the status of the zone, but you've lost your previous message. You don't know what's going on. You've kind of lost the flow of your conversation or your thread. So I just wanted to make that clear. There's the difference between passive and active.
Matt, it's Steve Rocks here. Are they both?
Hello, Steve.
Hello. Sorry, a bit late. Are they both in those two situations still giving the same status of comfort for that zone?
Yes. So they're both of those zones are directly tied to the comfort object. As comfort sends an update as the state of that zone, all the zones, all instances of that zone will receive that update.
Right.
Whether or not they actually generate a message as a result of that change in state or that query depends on whether trigger on new event is ticked or not.
Yes. Okay.
So if you don't
So
tick,
things like zones, I would expect them to effectively have that potentially that immediate update behavior anyway. Whereas a counter, that active, I could see being more useful, because there you want to actually poll it, find what it is, and then generate.
Yeah, absolutely. The only time in which I see the zone object in Node-RED being out of sync with comfort is generally when Node-RED starts or the alarm restarts. And then the way around that is so for example, in Node-RED, what I tend to do is I create and I've got an example of that here, I think, a timestamp trigger which injects once after 1 second.
Yes.
Into an object, and then I do an active poll and I turn everything else off. And then what that does is it forces the Node-RED to query the state of an object, and then anything else that's depending on that object will get an update because it's an active poll. So everything will then understand the latest state of that object.
Yeah, fine.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I was just kind of going through the various aspects of the kind of Cytec nodes, and I think there's a couple of improvements that I've got planned which aren't in here right now. Let's go back to this one. So this is an output. It's an output zone, output node, and we've got it defined to a particular output, and we can allow incoming events to set its state. But if you select all, it doesn't know which zone to set it to at the moment, which output needs to be set. So I'll make some changes so that you can actually put in the payload the output you're interested in, and then you can set its state, so you can do it programmatically. At the moment, it's a case of I want to tell flood left or flood right, or whichever output I want to turn on and off, and set it kind of in the hard code it in the node itself, in this node itself. In reality, I want it so you can do programmatically and do other things with them then.
Would that be similar to sort of what you're saying is if you put more than one output to be activated, couldn't that be done with a response in there?
You could do it with a response. You could certainly have a response instead, and then have that code running on the alarm itself, and that response go through and turn various outputs on and off. But if you want to do it programmatically in Node-RED, at the moment you'd have to, sorry, got rid of that. You'd drag a bunch of outputs, and then you'd all tie them. You tie them all to the same kind of thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So you just be repeating yourself, and it's ungainly. So doing it programmatically might be neater. It's just one of those things. So what?
I was thinking it's for most of the programming, if the response is already done, you could just whack one response and it will cover the whole lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you because I'm used to using programming it with Cytec, and you throw everything in there, don't you? Really?
Yeah. So you do everything in configurator, and then you can just call the response. And if you look in the response node, it's actually got the name of the responses in there, and you can kind of pick the response. Now, interestingly, if you change responses in Comfort, it might reorder how those named responses, sit on the Comfort system, because it kind of juggles the memory around. And I think each response is limited to something, I think it's like 16 bytes or something. But if a response is longer than 16 bytes, then it tends to kind of try and defrag the memory and adjust things so that you can fit your response in contiguous memory. So when you upload a new configuration file to Comfort, it's really important that you also upload the new configuration file back to
Node-RED.
node red. Otherwise, those things might be out of sync.
Yeah, Matt, on a little usability thing, for me, it would be nice if that responses drop down was sorted.
Oh,
by
in
name.
alphabetical order. Yeah, I'll take that as a note.
I did that for my node because otherwise it's impossible to find something. Well, it takes a while.
Yeah.
I know that tune.
yeah. So that should be easy enough to do. I'll get on that. Also, this response object will take a numbered response. So you can specify a number in the payload and then actually execute the numbered response. And I'm not quite sure whether the version that's deployed to you guys also takes text-based responses. So you can just name the response in the payload and it will go ahead and find that response in the configurator and then call the right response.
Right. It's nice.
Okay. Any other questions on the SciTech objects?
No, I'm happy with the SciTech responses, the nodes.
Okay.
They're very straightforward. So once you, excuse me, once you've loaded up your CLX file, it seems to it made more sense.
Yeah, I think that's right. Uploading the configuration file will suddenly give you the names that you're familiar with, and it becomes an awful lot easier to kind of to work on. So I suppose there were some other things that people were interested in, and one of the common questions was working with Alexa and Google Home.
Yes.
And I have a number of Alexas in the house, and I've recently got myself a Google Home, and I've been playing with it. So perhaps I can talk you through what I've done there. So the first thing I wanted to do was actually to get notifications, unsolicited notifications, because if something is happening in the house, which is perhaps not an alarm event, but something I just want to be mindful of, then it's nice if Alexa can tell me. An example of that might be I'm up in the study and the doorbell goes. Having Alexa tell me that the doorbell's rung is really handy because I can't actually hear it. Perhaps some activity in the garage when the alarm's on day mode would be nice just if I was told that was taking place. And both Alexa and Google Home allow those unsolicited notifications.
Sorry.
And there's my Alexa's kicking off because I spoke of the name. So let me give you a demonstration. What we've got here, I've got the Amazon device and I've got the Google device in my study, and there's a couple of third-party modules which allow us to talk to them. They both have their quirks. They're not necessarily massively easy to set up, but it's not that complicated. So let's start off with Alexa. I've said her name and she's going to start talking again.
Here are a few films playing by a second called.
Right. Okay. So here we have Alexa, and it's going to say just a text hello. So I'm going to send a message to it, and it should say it.
Hello.
So there you go. It's got a totally unsolicited message, and you've got a similar functionality with the Google device. It's a bit more complicated. It's set up. You set it up slightly differently, but again, I can send it a message.
Hello.
And she talks. Fantastic. So now we can start actually tying stuff together. Here's an example of actually getting a value from a counter and using it to tell us what that counter value is through Google. Oh, and it was really quiet, wasn't it? That was just, I don't know why that was so quiet. Just try again.
Sorry, I'm not sure how to help.
Oh.
Count to 10 is now 255.
Okay, so she just told us that, and I can do something very similar with the Amazon stuff.
Count to 11 is now 50.
So she's revealed the counter values, and you can start building strings which reflect the status of things. Here's a Here's another example. I've got a zone here. It's the garage door, and it would, on the status change, it would actually say, if I kind of drag the outputs to my Amazon device, and now inject a query into it, because obviously that garage door isn't being used. So if I change out the garage door. Okay, let's just do that, see if that works. What have I done wrong? Sorry, curse of the demo. Oh, it was actually a detailed one, sorry. Let's try that again.
Left garage door is closed.
So what's actually going on here is I'm listening to all the zones, and then I've got some filters on. This first filter here is just checking that it's zone number 26. And if it is, it passes the message through. The second filter is then looking at the value of it, whether it's on or off, 1 or 0, and then building a string, which is the message, which is actually taking the zone words from the zone and then putting is open, is closed. So whilst this is currently limited to just looking at one zone, it's very, very easy to extend this to actually think about those zones with doors that you're interested in, or other elements that you want to be able to notify on. So that's notification. So how did we do that? We've got these other nodes. One of them is called a Alexa Speak node. One of them is called the Home Mini. We can find them from the palette. Are you guys familiar with the palette? Have you looked at the palette, how to add kind of additional functionality?
I haven't at the moment, so this is a learning curve, but this has all been recorded, so it'd be easy to download and go through anyway, wouldn't it? Surely.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah. Apologies because I've skipped around an awful lot because it's kind of very ad hoc, and I don't have a script to run from. If you want to kind of find stuff to extend the capability of Node-RED, this is the best place to start, and you can start off by simply typing in what you're interested in. So Alexa. And I'm going to shut this up because you're going to keep talking. I can, if I just type in some keywords, I can quickly find functionality. You can then click on the button there, and you can read about what that particular module does, who wrote it, the capabilities, and if I typed in Alexa, there's a whole bunch of different Alexa type capabilities out there, and you have to kind of do a little bit of work, look through them. I found that this one here offered the most functionality for me in terms of, so this node here, Node-RED contrib Alexa local, that's the one I use to use Alexa as a means to control stuff. Then the additional module, Node-RED contrib Alexa remote, is the one I use to actually send messages back to Alexa, so it says stuff. It speaks unsolicited notifications. In the same way for the Google Home, do a quick look, and this Node-RED contrib cast is the way I send unsolicited messages to the Google Home devices and have it say stuff to me. And they're quite easy. You click install, takes a few moments, and then it's installed the module, and you end up with some additional nodes. So let's have a look. So this is the Alexa nodes for speaking. To use it, kind of drag the node out, and then go ahead and configure it. So each one of these takes a bit of configuring. What I'll do is I'll probably post some instructions later, but briefly, for the Amazon unsolicited notifications, you need to get your Amazon Alexa cookie, and you can get that from going to a web browser. I'll show you where we go, actually. It's Amazon sorry, it's alexa.amazon.co.uk. You need to sign in using your Amazon account. You then need to, this is complicated, develop tools in Google Chrome. Click on an object and you grab a cookie.
That's for the details of your actual Alexa.
Yes, there we go. That's the cookie we want.
Yeah,
you need to grab that cookie.
Yeah,
so
otherwise it won't work at all, apparently.
Yes, that's right. So you grab that, copy it, and then back in Node-RED, you paste it in here in this very small dialog box. But then once you've got that cookie, your Node-RED can authenticate back to the Amazon services and send the message. So
brilliant.
Thanks. It's right. It's quite complicated. It's not very well documented at all, but it works really well.
I'll be honest with you. I read up on it and I just didn't understand it. To see it work in that way it's just made it very sort of clear.
And I think there's an opportunity. Obviously, what tends to happen in the whole kind of Node-RED ecosystem is people develop nodes that they want, and then they publish them, but they only develop them as far as is necessary for it to work for them. And it's only until you get enough people interested in the same node that it gets developed and fully rounded as a node. Otherwise, it ends up being developed as far as that person needs it for the things they want to achieve. Which is why, yeah. So, but the code that supports these Alexa functions actually doesn't necessarily need the cookie. The code supports the ability to go and grab the cookie itself, but whoever developed the node hasn't implemented that part of it. So you have to go through that kind of extra step. But once you've done it, it works really well. The difference between the Alexa unsolicited notification and the Google Home one is, the Google Home one is direct from Node-RED to your Google Home device, whereas the Alexa one actually goes to your the Alexa service in the cloud, and then it comes back to your Alexa device. So the Alexa one takes a fraction longer to speak than the Google one, and if your internet connection is down, it won't function. Whereas the Google one would function even if the internet connection isn't down.
Oh, right. So that makes the Google one a bit more
bit more appealing from that point of view. However, on the other side of the argument, getting the Google Home to respond to voice commands to affect your alarm via Node-RED currently requires that you install the module and you open a port on your firewall which you expose to the internet. Because the Google Home has to go to the cloud to act upon your action to come back into the alarm, whereas the Alexa implementation doesn't. The Alexa implementation is a direct control from Alexa to Node-RED, because Node-RED is pretending to be a Philips Hue bridge, and that's how we make things happen. So let's talk about let's go actually do a notification as well then. So I have put some in somewhere. Let me find one. Down here. No. So this is, as I was saying earlier, this is my kind of scratch pad of all sorts of bits and pieces, and as a result, sometimes it's difficult to find things. No, not there, not there. Oh, I'll do a new one. Okay, let's find the Alexa node. There we go, Alexa local. So here we have the Alexa local devices came from the Alexa local plugin, which we kind of saw briefly earlier in there, in the palette, and this will pretend to be a Philips Hue device. So I can give it a name, and I'm going to try and give it a name which I haven't got in here at the moment. So let's try Jim, because I don't have a Jim. I'm not going to confuse it. So I'm going to say the Jim Lite. And that's created a node which will generate data when discovered by Alexa. So first of all, I've got to get Alexa to discover it. So I'm going to deploy it. Which one was that? Google Home notification, Alexa speak. Yeah. I deployed a node and didn't configure it properly, so let's get rid of that. So let's deploy that. So now Gym Light is discoverable. So I need to actually get Alexa to find it. Alexa, discover my devices.
Starting discovery. This will take up to 20 seconds. If you haven't already, please enable the smart home skill for your smart device from the Alexa app.
So we saw then the status change there, and Alexa has now found the Gym Light.
Mm.
So
I found Gym Light, and you can control it by saying, turn off Gym Light.
okay, so exactly she says, I can say turn off Gym Light. Alexa, turn off Gym Light.
Okay.
And it sent the message off to it. And obviously we can then now pass that message and actually use it to control comfort nodes or have additional logic performed upon it. So the Alexa integration is very simple, but it only supports very simple commands on, off, and it can also set percentages. So I can say, Alexa, set Gym Light to 30%.
Okay.
So it's now set the Gym Light to 30%, and in the detailed packets, not message or payload, but in detail, you can actually see that the number 30 is there, and you can perform various, so you could use it to do other things. It's a little bit hacky, but it's very simple. It's easy to set up. It doesn't require you to develop scripts for Alexa or anything else. And it's the way that I tend to use it because it's very stable as well. Okay. Anything else that you're interested in looking at?
So now with that one you just put in there, how would you actually? I'm just looking at so getting Alexa to tell you that the Gym Light is on.
Right. So asking Alexa a question about Gym Light, or having Alexa tell you.
Yeah, when you're talking about your unsolicited notification sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay. So let's try. I'm going to just mute Alexa while I do. Let's just put something together here. Let's tie Gym Light to an output. Let's take output 10. Choose a different one because I might be using that somewhere else. Output 12. I'm allowing incoming bit sent, set the output state. It's going to be message.payload on or off. I'm going to turn append off, otherwise I'll end up getting 2 messages out of it. And I'm not going to trigger. Okay. Let's do that. We're also going to put output 12 here as well, as triggered on a new event. Boolean on off. And I'm going to then just make that actually readable. So I'm going to use a change node here. I'll go through this in a minute. I'm going to add it to a Alexa Speak. There's Alexa Speak. There we go. That to be 12. Simplified. Okay. Okay, so what's happening now is Gym Light is connected to output 12. When I say Alexa, turn Gym Light on, it'll turn the on command to output 12. When I say Alexa, turn Gym Light off, it'll send the output to Alexa to output 12. On output 12, when that changes state, it will send a message to out, which we will then use to craft a text message, a piece of text, which Alexa will speak. So I'm going to use something called JSONator. This little kind of weird J with a colon represents something called JSONator, which is a really simple scripting language. It's not as complicated as perhaps something like JavaScript, but allows you to build expressions up very quickly. And I'm gonna just basically say something like, I'm going to edit here. I'm going to say Jim Light has been turned, and then message.payload, because if you recall, it's going to say on or off.
Yeah.
Oh, that's it.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I start to understand a lot more now.
So it's basically I'm setting the message, but I've got to actually, for the Alexa thing, it's actually expecting the text to be in something called each variable can be overridden with message.xxx. So it's expecting message.text to be equal to that, I think. So let's just, although it's payload to text, let me just check I'm going to check. This is one of the, where do I do that? Message.payload.text. Okay. So message.payload.text. Okay, see it. Gemini has been turned on or off. What I will need to do first is one of the things that you find is if you've got a message.payload set to a string or a number or Boolean, you can't add kind of sub objects to it. So what I tend to do as a matter of habit is just keep things tidied. I do that. If I'm going to start manipulating the message payload, I tend to do things to make it a bit easier and overcome some of those challenges. So one of the first things I do is I created a new object called message.input, and I set it the value of message.payload. So if you can imagine inside your envelope, you've got some other envelopes. One of them's called input, and one of them's called payload. I'm taking the contents of payload and putting it into input.
Okay.
And I do that first, and then I end up deleting the payload, the existing payload message, because it's now stored in input. Right. And then I use input now as the variable in here rather than payload. So what I've done is input has taken the value of payload has been erased, and a payload.text has been recreated, and it has got the text Gemini has been turned on or off based upon message.input. Otherwise, and this is one of the kind of quirks of Node-RED, I suppose, is if you try and create if you've got a message.payload that's a simple object, a string or a number or a Boolean, you can't create kind of child objects to it, but it doesn't warn you that, or it doesn't tell you that, so it just doesn't work. And it's really frustrating. You're kind of wondering what's going on, why it hasn't worked, and it's because of that. Again, play with it, use the debug nodes, that will really help you kind of overcome those little challenges, or reach out to me on Slack.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder it's easier just to use a function node.
Yeah, function nodes are good. I mean, you can build JavaScript functions very easily then, but obviously it's having that knowledge of JavaScript and the syntax, which for people who aren't familiar with it, can be a bit intimidating. Okay, so where was I? I'd got this Jim Light, doing an output, and now the output will trigger an event. We'll build some text, and then Alexa to speak it. So I'm just going to deploy this once I've determined that that's I need. Oh, so specify here the room. So it's in the study, and that's all I need. I'm just going to set the volume so we can make sure we hear it. Click done. So now we should have some action. Alexa, turn the gym light on.
Okay. Gym light has been turned on.
So we had an action, and then we got the response back from it. Now, the one thing that we can't do with Alexa is with it. Oh, stop it! She keeps lighting up, and
I
there
don't
we
know
go.
that one.
One of the things we can't do that isn't supported by this simple Alexa local node is we can't ask it for status of things. So we can't ask it, Alexa, is the gym light turned on? If you do that, it should eventually say, I don't know how to do that, because this node function doesn't support it. But what you can do is you can say, Alexa, you could build a node which effectively allows you to say, turn light status on or something like that, and then you could have it speak, build a function which allows you to go through, check the status of all the lights and tell you what's going on. So you can kind of get around it like that.
Yeah, that sounds pretty much similar to what you've just done there.
Yeah. It's not dissimilar. It's not perfect, but it's a very workable system, and it is reliable.
Yeah.
Is there any other topics? Have you had much time to play with the dashboard to kind of build your user interface or look at HomeKit and integrate with the Apple devices?
I've done very little, to be honest with you. I haven't had the time. It's kind of been dragged up for some of the other stuff at the moment. The one thing I was looking at is obviously you've just told what you've actually showed me with the input in that code. It's kind of helped me out with because I'm going to use Pushbullet to actually get notifications on all devices.
Okay.
So you can, if you've got your mobile phone, it will tell you if somebody's opened your gate or if the driveway's been somebody's accessed a driveway or pushed your doorbell. So it's actually sort of doing a similar function to what Ring does.
Yes, and that's great. I like Pushbullet. I think it's a neat service, and it allows you to get around there. I mean, there are other services similar. If This Then That is another good one to use for sending notifications.
Right.
And I'm actually in the.
Sorry, Matt. I was going to say I use Twitter for that.
Oh.
My house has got its own account, and my house just tweets to me direct messages.
That's a good idea. Can you attach images to your tweets?
Yes, because I've got it linked up to my home camera on the front door. So whenever somebody walks up, it sends me a tweet with an image.
That's really neat. Because I currently have if I go down here, I currently have so I currently have a system where if there's movement in the porch, it will turn the TV on if the TV's off in the lounge, and then change the channel to another Raspberry Pi, which is streaming the camera image from the porch camera.
You've done similar to me with the LG TV. I get it, put a message up on the TV. Yeah,
it's really neat, isn't it? I mean, but you can. Did you know you can add images into that porch toast? So I actually get a photograph of who's at the who's in the porch.
Okay. Yeah.
I just want to. So yeah, you can. I'll send you this because it's pretty straightforward. But you can actually send an image from your camera straight to the TV, and it appears in that notification.
That's a really good idea, because I was trying to use that LG TV node because there was a way of getting it to automatically change TV. Change channels or get it to open up the browser. So I was getting it to fire the browser up onto the camera. But okay, that's a good idea.
So you can send the photo, but I have it working in two ways. And what I actually do is first of all I check to see whether the TV's on or off. And if the TV's on, I do that toast. But if the TV's off, then I actually turn the TV on and change the channel to a Raspberry Pi, which is streaming the cameras. Right. So that if you're in there but the TV's not on, then you don't mind the fact the TV comes on and you can actually see the video of whatever's going on. But if you're watching TV, then that little notification's enough to tell you stuff. But I'm actually in the process of going a little step further, and at the moment I have a lot of different complicated pieces of code which deal with separate events and notifications with those events. And I'm finding myself duplicating notifications. So I'm building a kind of a master notification page which will receive notifications from all other aspects of my system and then decide based upon perhaps the priority of the notification or perhaps type of content, what to do with that notification, and do things like if a room is occupied, if I believe a room is occupied, and it's a notification which can be spoken, then speak it out on an Alexa if it's sufficiently high priority, so that as you know, the family interacts with the house and moves around the house, we use things like the PIR sensors, or the fact that a TV's turned on, or the PlayStation's turned on, or whatever, to determine whether a room is in use or not. And then if the room's in use, that room becomes eligible to receive notifications. And if that room has a TV in it or has an Alexa in it or whatever, then notifications generated by the system will be sent to those devices so that we can see things that are going on. And that will also help me down the line, because I do intend to match the central heating system back to room activity and historic room activity. That's a much bigger topic, perhaps for another time. But I didn't. The Twitter idea is a great idea, because currently what happens is when I have activity on the drive or in the porch, or the doorbell is pressed, it sends me an email with a photograph. And so I've got this historic list of historic emails in my inbox, which is great, because I can go through there and see who's been on my drive or in the porch historically. But I think having a tweet with a picture with a direct message is a really neat idea for getting that. Someone's at the door right now. Here's what they look like. Concept.
Yeah, it's just me being really tight. I didn't want to pay for a subscription service, and I thought, well, Twitter can do
I
this.
agree with you there.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's how fast is the Steve? How fast is the response with the Twitter?
Within a second.
So it's pretty fast.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
That's really neat.
Yeah, the only reason I was using Push Bullet is because it's multi-platform. I could get but so's Twitter.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, might have to look into that. I don't know how, because I'm not really, I've never really been a Twitter user. So.
And how easy is it to set the Twitter node up, Steve? Is it pretty straightforward?
It used to be easy. They've tightened it up a bit now in terms of, I think you've got to apply for an account, like a developer account.
Right.
Because the Node-RED Twitter node goes in through their API. So, with everything that's going on around all these Twitter factories and stuff like that, sending fake rubbish, they've really tightened it up. So I think you have to register, and then you get an account, and then and then you just do it from there. And I just created an account for my house, and just really easy.
Yeah, that's a really neat idea.
The hard bit was getting the image from the camera, but I've got I can go and look that up and share that. I'm happy to share that.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah, I mean that's really helpful. A really neat idea. I'm gonna give that a go. To get that from a direct message point of view.
Okay, I'll post it into the Slack.
Brilliant. That'd be great.
My little flow for doing that.
That'd be awesome. Thank you. I suppose we've only got a couple of minutes left. I'm conscious that it's getting on a bit. There's one other thing that's quite interesting and from a dashboard point of view, and that's the graphing function. And I don't know if that's of interest to you guys yet. But I've been working with Stu on his kind of environmental monitoring system, which is a kind of a different product. I think it's based on the same hardware, but it's just full of sensors, and they're using it to monitor kind of machine rooms and other areas where passive monitoring of the environment is quite useful. But what we're doing is we're storing the data historically over time on the Node-RED device, on the UCM Pi, and then you can go back and query the data and build graphs of it. And so in a very basic term, we've got this kind of zone activity over time. I recently just kind of reset this particular UCM Pi, so the data's not very old, but you can kind of see, you can start plotting zone activity over time, and it's relatively interesting. and I can't get to that tab because there we go. But this is another one. This is actually using Netatmo data, which is a kind of a little weather station, Internet of Things weather station. And I'm querying it and then writing the data to so InfluxDB running on the Pi, and then we can then plot those values, and you can zoom in and look at what's going on. And if people are interested in kind of storing that data, I was going to store that data because I intend to use it for start baselining and trending room activity, and then using that to drive things like the central heating system. So rather than build fixed schedules for rooms using Evo Home, I'll start build dynamic schedules based on room activity, which is my ultimate goal really. But if you're interested in how to start storing data and then using that data over time, I'll post some other things into Slack as well.
That may come in handy in the future, actually, for installations for people.
I think there's an awful lot of potential with Node-RED, and we just need to kind of find those elements. I think there's a lot that can be done for automation and for linking to third-party services. Just need some inspiration, really. What are people using it for?
Yeah.
Okay. Right then. Well, thank you very much, guys. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Matt. You've kind of enlightened me on what I'm supposed to be doing now. And I've also got reference points now to actually work back with. As I said, when it comes to Raspberry Pi, I'm a complete and total so, but it's made it quite simple to actually. I'm looking at it. It's not as hard as I thought it was going to be.
No, I think it is initially quite intimidating, but I actually think it's probably easier than SmartThings was, and I think it's probably a lot more powerful than SmartThings is, and without the stability challenges that we had with it. So I'm really hoping that those, because I know quite a few people kind of took on SmartThings, invested in the SmartThings hardware, connected to the Raspberry Pi just to expose the comfort functions, and then when we kind of stopped progressing it because we found it challenging, they were a bit disappointed. So I'm hoping that you guys who've used SmartThings see the value in Node-RED and the fact that actually you can probably do an awful lot more than you could do with SmartThings.
Yeah.
In the end,
it's like I said, it's like for me the big thing for me is that you can it's the push notifications, because Comfort doesn't actually support that itself. SmartThings doesn't. It's Alexa doesn't. But this does.
Yeah.
Well, as Steve was saying about using a Twitter account, because I know there are limitations with Push Bullet, but I shall work.
And if this and that as well. If you've not used if you struggle with limitations with Push Bullet, I use if this and that for notifications, and that's very neat as well. But you need to have the if this and that client on your mobile phone.
Yeah.
But you can also use that then to start interacting with other services. One of the other things. Sorry, I'm over time now. But one of the things I'm working on right now is an inbound HTTP listener, so that you can receive inbound notifications from services that use kind of HTTP calls, but whilst not exposing your Raspberry Pi or your UCM Pi to the internet. It kind of comes through the cloud service, so that we're not. Because one of the things I'm very conscious of is I don't want this to become a security burden or a security risk, so I'm minimizing that as much as I can by proxying all those kind of, but also want to enable you to interact with third-party services. So by proxying it in a cloud service, hopefully we can provide that level of security and that air gap. But yeah, if this and that is another great one that works really well, really easy to implement and might do what you want it to do from a notification point of view. And also, you can then tie it into a whole bunch of other devices not natively supported by Node-RED. One of those, for example, is I've got there's something called BMW Labs. If you've got a BMW car that's relatively modern, you can actually get the car to send notifications via if this and that when the car is started, when it's stopped, its location, its speed, and then you can hook this into Node-RED, and I will then be able to use that to tell the house when I'm near home and to perhaps turn the porch light on and to do things like that.
Turn your heating on, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so there's another service called Life 360. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that.
I do remember it. Yeah.
That will generate notifications into if this and that when people leave the house, when the first person arrives or the last person leaves, and you can use that to automatically set the alarm.
HomeKit's supposed to do that, but I can't get it to work.
I haven't tried, actually. I haven't tried with HomeKit. The one challenge that we have, actually looking at that kind of Life 360 approach, is when my wife and I leave the house, then most of the time, everyone's out of the house and we're doing our usual kind of life is going on, kids are at school, we're at work, that sort of thing. But occasionally, there'll be a babysitter in the house, the kids will be in bed, and we're going to go out and have a drink. Now, the logic would be then the alarm gets set and the poor babysitter is in the house that's going wild. What you can do now with this kind of logic is you could do something along the lines of, okay, everyone's left the house. I'm now going to speak on the Alexa devices, and I'm going to put a notification on the TV. It's going to say something like, everyone's left the house, or I think everyone's left the house. But if you're in the house and you don't want the alarm to be set, walk around in the next 2 minutes, and we'll have notifications from the sensors, and the alarm won't be set. So it's a kind of fail-safe mode that if Nicola and I go out and we're going to go out for a drink and there is a babysitter here, something will happen. Okay, stand up or do something, and the alarm won't set because there's somebody in the house.
Yeah. Lost me.
Anyway, I think that's enough for now. I was thinking of doing another call in perhaps about a week's time, where we can perhaps have a bit more of a Q&A when you've had more time to play with it, and hopefully others can join. What do you think?
Yep, I'll definitely be there.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, guys. I'm going to publish out this this little video, and best of luck.
Brilliant.
Any problems, questions, please let me know. Any bugs, please let me know. And I'll hopefully by this time next week I'll have another update with some fixes for the bugs that we've come across so far.
Lovely.
Okay, thank you.
Cheers, Matt.
Brilliant. Cheers, guys.
Yeah, great.
Appreciate it.
Cheers. Bye-bye now.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye all.